Hey everybody, welcome to Truth Be Told. Thanks very much for listening in. I appreciate you being here today. We've got a really interesting episode connecting both the Old and the New Testaments. I always love when we can do that because these two sections of Scripture are intimately connected, and yet somehow we have a difficult time finding out how. I mean, so often people feel like they're either Old Testament studiers or New Testament studiers, and we know that there's overlap for sure. We know that, Jesus talks to his disciples and explains the scriptures concerning himself, and we kind of get it, but also very often we read the Old Testament, it's hard for us to kind of see how it informs the New Testament exactly, unless it's like a direct quote from it or something. So hopefully this one's interesting for you, and kind of like a secondary lesson on how to sometimes do this, like how to connect the two. Many people point to sections of the gospel where Jesus talks about his work with Israel and the Jewish people, and they conclude that he was unconcerned with the Gentiles, like he just didn't really care about them. And it's true that he did come to set Israel's leaders straight. He did come to seek and save his lost sheep who had no shepherd and gather them to himself. That's all true. And we do have sections where Jesus says things that are kind of hard to reconcile with this idea that he was concerned with the entire population of the world, not just the Jews. In Matthew 15:24, we have a very frequently brought up story of a woman who has a daughter that is possessed by a demon, and she is from the area of Tyre and Sidon, so up north and to the west of Israel, Gentile nation, at times very friendly with Israel, but not Israelite in and of itself. And she cries out to Jesus for help as he's traveling, and his reply is, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." He even goes as far as to say, what I have to give is for those lost sheep, my children, not the Gentiles. And he gets kind of a bad rap in this section for referring to her and all Gentiles as dogs. I don't really want to get too in the weeds on this one, but that word for dogs is not like street rat strays, full of fleas. The word is kinariis, and it's puppies or house dog. Much more endearing term. Still, though, we might have some issue with that. But, does this section mean that Jesus is unconcerned with the Gentiles? I would argue no. And what's interesting about this is there actually could be an indication that Jesus is saying it's the children's job to feed the animals after the parents have fed the children. Parents don't go and feed their dogs before feeding their kids. If they have one meal, it's going to the children. But then the children, either in a modern context, you could think of like a kid in a high chair, like dropping stuff on the floor for the dog and just thinking it's very entertaining. But in these agrarian societies in the ancient Near East, children's responsibilities were very often making sure that the animals, that the livestock, that the sheep dogs and the guard dogs all had their food. And so it could be, even though this is only loosely historically based and not directly from Scripture, it could be that Jesus is saying, like, I'm here to feed my children, but it's the children's responsibility to then go and feed the dogs. They didn't exactly, there were dogs living in society at that time. There were dogs that were unacceptable to society, symbols of, people on the outskirts or things on the outskirts, things to be avoided, things to be feared, things of kind of disease. But they also had these kinariis, which are puppies, household dogs, things that were meant to guard and protect either people or sheep. So they did have this concept of still having like family dogs, but it might not have been quite as familial as like the pets that we have in the modern age. But still, I think there's some precedent for thinking that Jesus was saying, I'm going to feed my kids, and then my kids are responsible for feeding the dogs or the puppies. I think if you want to say it in a way that sounds better, and really it is indicated something much more gentle than people that are looking to accuse Jesus of hating on Gentiles often want to say. And I think that, again, even though this is only loosely historically based and not biblically a direct thing that's being said here, I think based on what we're going to look into today, this might have some credence to believing, it might be the thing that Jesus was trying to say in this statement, but let's look into it. In Isaiah 51, verses 4 through 5, we get, I said we're going to the Old Testament, then we'll get to the New Testament. We get this really interesting couple of chapters, honestly, in the book of Isaiah that is very much concerned about how God works and what he expects of his people. He says this, "Give attention to me, my people. Give ear to me, my nation. For a law will go out from me, and I will set my justice for a light to the peoples." That's not his people. That's other peoples, surrounding peoples, the nations. "My righteousness draws near. My salvation has gone out, and my arm will judge the peoples. The coastlands hope for me, and for my arm they wait." The coastlands, again, people on the outskirts, people not within the official territory of Israel. So imagine Jesus here is like a huge fire, and Israel is like a group of torches that have no light to them. In fact, actually, just prior to this, in chapter 50, God does talk about Israel as torchbearers that aren't living by the light of God, but have instead kindled their own fires, their own light, their own wisdom and understanding, and it's going to get them burnt. But now, he's saying in chapter 51, draw near to God and light your torch. For what? It says, for a light to the peoples or the nations. So righteousness, it says, draws near, but then salvation goes out, and the coastlands hope for him. So Israel lights their torches in order to go out and show the light of God to the nations. This is kind of the design of God for his people, that they're always meant to be a model nation. They're always meant to go out and proclaim him to the other nations, and that people should be able and readily assisted with coming into the nation should they wish to draw near to God. We get this in Isaiah 56, verses 6 through 7, and we also get a very familiar passage that many people will remember from the New Testament. In amidst all this talk about light going to the Gentiles, barren places being made fruitful, which is symbolism for that same thing, and foreigners clinging to God, this section in Isaiah 56, starting in verse 6, says, "And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord and to be his servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it and holds fast my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for" who? All peoples. We get that word again, meaning not just his people, but all peoples will be brought in at some point. And that last line we hear from Jesus when he overturns the money changers' tables at the temple, when he says, "My house shall be called a house of prayer." But wait a second, I thought that Jesus was upset because the money changers were being so corrupt and doing some shady dealing and cheating the people with exorbitant prices when they came to exchange things for money for an offering, or purchase offerings. And that's true in part. That is what Jesus is upset about. But he also pairs this quote, "house of prayer for all peoples," with one from Jeremiah 7, verse 11. It says, "Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord." Just before this section in the book of Jeremiah, it says that Israel has been disobedient. And what have they been corrupt about? What have they been disobedient in? We'll find out in just a second. But if they change their ways, they'll be allowed to stay in the land and continue worshiping at God's house. But verses 5 and 6 explains the corruption they were engaged in. They weren't executing justice among each other. They were shedding innocent blood. They were chasing after foreign gods, and they were oppressing the foreigner, the widow, and the fatherless. And this all comes together when we realize that Jesus, when he flips the tables of the money changers and condemns the corruption that he sees, is doing so at the steps leading up to the court of the Gentiles. So there's a section of the temple meant just for Gentile converts, those who are foreigners who have heard about God and about his law and want to come and worship him. They're trying to join themselves with God, and they would come and exchange money at the temple to give offerings in fulfillment of exactly what Isaiah was prophesying about in the last verse we just read. But this is where the Jewish people were choosing to extort. This is where they were jacking up the prices. This is where they decided to seek unfair gain. And this is not okay. So why is Jesus angry? Because they're extorting people and making it hard for them to come to God and worship? Yes, but even more specifically, because they are doing this to the very ones they are meant to show the light of God to. Incidentally, we also get a really cool thing because in that Jeremiah section, it says, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord. And Jesus, when he exercises judgment on the money changers, is kind of stepping in to say, I'm the one witnessing this and I'm the one going to do something about it. He's equating himself with the Lord or Yahweh. But this all goes to show that Jesus is absolutely concerned with Israel's conduct, yes. But why? Because he's concerned with the Gentiles. Jesus absolutely went to the lost sheep of the house of Israel so that he could gather them up, so then he could send them out. Jesus desired to light the torches of his people so that they could go and be a light to the world. So in being concerned about his people, he absolutely is concerned with the world because his people are meant to do a work in the world. So whenever you hear someone say that Jesus was just for the Jews or only concerned with the Jewish people or the Israelites in the first century, or you're presented with some of these difficult passages where Jesus seems to favor the Israelites over the Gentiles, remember why that is. It's because he's called them to do a work for the rest of the people on the earth. So you can confidently reject this idea that Jesus is only for the Jews. The first stage in his plan was to gather his people back to himself so they could be sent back out. Jesus is supremely concerned with all people coming to him. And when those he has called do not share in that concern, his judgment is quick.